My name is Daniel Barea. I'm an analyst here at Rightmove, and today I'll be speaking with someone who is a true expert in the world of property. His name is Miles Shipside. So Miles is a qualified chartered surveyor. He's worked in a state agency for 20 years and then went on to becoming one of the founding directors at Rightmove. So he has over 40 years of experience in the industry. Now, being from Rightmove means he has access to a tremendous amount of data. So he's in a unique position to see what is going on. So Rightmove has visibility of when houses come onto the market, when they come off the market, how many people are looking, what they're looking for, where they're looking, what's happening with prices, and so much more. So I'm really looking forward to having this conversation. Now, we have had thousands of you reach out to us asking for information, updates, advice. So we're happy to be able to do this session with you today. So before I bring Miles on, I'd like to make a couple of quick points. The first and most important really is that whatever you hear from us today, particularly if it comes in the shape of advice, is that it's imperative to remember that when making your plans, the advice of the government and the NHS should really supersede any advice that you hear from us today or anyone else for that matter. So your safety really should be your top priority. Secondly, as I said, many thousands of you lovely people have signed up to this broadcast. So we've received thousands of questions beforehand, and there are many being sent in right now. So they are coming in, and many of the questions actually that you've asked are similar in nature. So we're trying our best to group these questions into buckets, right? So certain categories so that we can answer as many of them as we can. So it's likely we may not be able to read your question specifically, but be assured that we are reading them and we will try to answer as many of them as possible. We've allocated about half an hour to today's session, but as the uptake for the broadcast has completely exceeded our expectations, we'll be flexible with time. So we will follow your lead, really. If there are still many of you on the line and lots of questions coming in about half an hour's time, we'll just stay on for an extra 10 or 15 minutes. If you'd like to send in any questions, if you are on a laptop, you should see a control panel on the right-hand side of the screen. So just click on that and you should see a little question box where you can send in your questions. And if you're on a mobile, just click on the screen and you should see the option there to type in a question. Okay, so with no further ado, let me bring in Mr. Miles Shipside, who should be on the screen. There he is. How are you doing, Miles?
Hi, Dan. Nice to see that your lockdown beard's had a trim since our video call yesterday. Very smart.
Well, we've got a lovely audience, so I thought I'd make an effort. Thanks for taking the time to come in today. I know you're busy, especially right now during these times. So we really do appreciate that. Miles, like I was just saying a second earlier, we've got thousands of questions being sent in. People who want to know your thoughts on what is happening and importantly, what may happen going forward. So I hope you have a functional crystal ball there on your desk so you can tell us what to look forward to.
Yeah, well, we've got access to lots of data, so we'll do our best.
Yes, absolutely. And the questions that we're getting, they seem to be coming in certain categories. They're coming from people who are currently on the market. So they brought their house onto the market before lockdown, and so they want to know what they should do now. There are people who aren't yet on the market, but they're thinking of selling soon. There are buyers, so either first-time buyers or second home buyers with questions around mortgages, affordability, etc. We've got a fair amount of questions from buy-to-let investors and renters as well. So quite a mix going there. But before we get into specific questions, could you give us a quick overview of what the market has looked like for, say, the last 12 months or so leading up to lockdown? I think this will help to add context to the conversation, and it may be helpful to use that as a backdrop to what is happening today. It will also answer a lot of the questions that have already been sent in. So what was the market doing? What was it looking like leading up to lockdown?
Yeah, I might go back a bit further than 12 months, actually, Dan, because we had the Brexit referendum over 3 years ago, and then we had a minority government after that. So one of the things that the housing market thrives on is certainty, and it was a very uncertain political backdrop, and were we going to stay, were we going to leave? And that meant a lot of people sort of hung back because of that lack of certainty in their home moving plans. Once there was the surprise majority government in December's election, that seemed to clear the air for a lot of people. And combined with low interest rates, freedom of freely available mortgages, there was a lot of pent up demand from those previous 3 years. So we actually had the busiest start to the year in terms of activity, in terms of the number of sales agreed for 4 years. And indeed, some record traffic days on Rightmove as well. So a lot of buyer demand, a lack of supply, demand outstripping supply, and therefore some upwards price pressure as well. So that's how we came in to March and the lockdown.
What was that upward pressure on prices looking like? How much were they increasing by?
It was relatively gentle, and this is important. We'll probably come on to this later, why that's important as well. But it was around 2 to 3%. So a gentle market, prices weren't racing away, and mortgages available. But there were signs that prices weren't going to increase at a faster pace.
Okay, so prices were so there was a relatively buoyant market at the beginning of the year. The 2 to 3% increase in prices in property, is that compared to the same period last year?
Indeed, annual rate of increase.
Okay, all right. And so what's happening to the market now then? I mean, is it completely frozen? Is there any activity going on?
Well, as we all know, stay at home means stay at home. And that has obviously affected the estate agency industry, as it has done many other employers as well. So physical viewings aren't capable, and neither are physical visits by estate agents to value and put properties on the market. So there is activity, a lot of people obviously at home, and therefore perhaps discovering that their home doesn't quite suit their needs, and a lot of people searching on Rightmove. And one of the things that some estate agents have done, and Rightmove's added functionality on, is to be able to show more videos. So it's almost like a virtual viewing. Not that many properties have it at the minute because obviously lockdown came before agents could go out and take videos, but time to search and research, and lots of people are doing that. So still signs of pent-up demand.
We are getting a lot of questions from people asking when or if viewings and valuations are happening. I guess at this point it's worth reminding everyone the advice that the government is giving is that we should all avoid any non-essential moves. You also mentioned that we had a sort of some record-breaking months in January when it comes to traffic on Rightmove. So these people who are looking on Rightmove, they're sending through inquiries, and on the other side of these inquiries are estate agents who are right now, faced with their own set of challenges. So what do you know about sort of how they're operating right now and how they've been affected by all of this?
Yeah, it's a good point. Like many other people, some estate agents are on furlough as well. But all agents have a skeleton of staff. Some have more than that. So actually, if you're doing your researching, it's quite a good time to get hold of your local agent, maybe to ask them some questions, because they're obviously not able to get out to see you at the moment. So inquiries may take a bit longer to be answered, understandably.
Yeah. Okay. More of a general question around the climate right now. There's a lot of comparisons being made to the situation that we're in now, comparing that to the recession in 2008. I guess there are certain similarities there, but is that a fair comparison? Would you say that it's a comparable set of circumstances, economically speaking?
Yes and no, but there are some important differences. First one is that this pause in the housing market is caused not primarily by an economic downturn, but by health. And that health has obviously led to this sharp economic downturn, which is a threat to people's wealth as well as their health, and obviously it's interrupted the economy too. Let's remember the fundamentals as well as of the housing market. So when we look back at previous downturns, it's important for an active housing market that you have freely available mortgages, low deposits at low interest rates, you have good employment levels, and also you have positive consumer sentiment. So just going back to 2008, credit crunch, the reason it was called a credit crunch was because it was hard to get credit. So mortgages, particularly hard to get. One had to get the best rates, really have a 40 or 50% deposit, which ruled out vast sectors of the market, first-time buyers, second-time buyers. This time round, it remains to be seen, but the government has certainly thrown a lot of money so far at supporting industries, to support future employment, obviously extensive furloughing as well. The increase in money supply is forecast to be around 6%. In the 2008 downturn, it was purely 1%. So really important.
It's a big difference.
Yeah. That the amount of money that's been pumped into the UK economy to make sure not only that we get through the downturn, but hopefully recover the other side. And let's not forget, it's not just the UK, the EU pumping in billions as well, and America pumping in billions too. So it's important when we look to come out the other side that the UK does this, but obviously we live in a worldwide economy to a degree, so it's important that the world recovers as well, and there's a lot of money being pumped in. But it has been a sharp downturn.
And would you say that the process of recovery would be somewhat similar as far as the time it takes as in 2008? I mean, you must be in the loop as to what economists are forecasting.
Yeah. Obviously, the forecasts are rife with danger, but the vast majority of economists do say that this looks like a V-shaped situation, sharp on the way down, and because of that money supply that I talked about being pumped into the economy, protect jobs and protect income, then they're saying that this could be a relatively sharp upturn as well. How sharp that'll be, obviously, remains to be seen. Another little interesting factor is that because we had relatively benign price growth going into this period, that is different to previous downturns as well, when we often had rapid price growth followed by an economic situation, which meant prices were perhaps more vulnerable in those downturns.
Okay, so several key differences there. So let's move on to start taking a few specific questions from the audience, and there are many of them. Now, before we do, we're going to launch a poll here for all of you here on the line, just so we can get an idea as to who is asking these questions. So your screen should be turning blue in a second, and you'll be able to let us know what your plans were leading up to lockdown. So we've got a few options there. What were you planning? Were you planning to buy for the first time? Were you planning on buying and selling your property just to buy, but not for the first time? Only to sell, or were you about to rent a property from a landlord or an agent? So if by any chance you are none of these apply to you, then just don't click on any of them, and the screen should go off from your screens in the next few seconds. There are a lot of you on the line, and many of you are answering the poll, so thank you for that. If you haven't yet, you've got a few more seconds. I'll leave it on there for another 2 or 3 seconds, and we'll close it now. And Miles, let's have a look at these results and share them with everybody. Okay. All right, so the majority are actually first-time buyers. That's interesting. We've got a fair amount of people that are looking to buy and sell. Some buyers, 9% looking to sell a property, and a 2% of the audience are renters about to rent a property from their landlord. Okay, well,
Good.
thanks
I
for
think
voting in.
we've got most people in the home moving scenario there. So let's try and answer all their questions.
Let's go for it. Okay, so why don't we start taking questions from those who are currently on the market? So these are people who brought their properties onto the market before lockdown. One of the big questions is, what are other sellers doing? Are they withdrawing their properties from the market? Have you seen that?
Well, this is actually somewhat surprising, because obviously people can't physically view properties, and therefore it's really hard for them to put offers in. But in spite of that scenario, the vast majority of people that are up for sale and still looking for a buyer are still on the market. So again, coming back to our statistics, over 97% of the properties that were on at the time of lockdown are still remaining on the market. So they look like motivated sellers, and obviously many have a pressing need to move, whether that's lack of space or job or other reasons. And the vast majority are continuing with their plans. So that's a vote of confidence, I think, in the housing market.
Okay, so the difference between the number of available properties before lockdown and after nationally is how
Yeah,
much?
it's a drop of just over 2%. 97,
Okay.
yeah, over 97% still on the market.
Okay. I guess the next question then is, what's happening to the prices of those properties that are on the market? Are you seeing a lot of reductions in order to attract more buyers, or yeah?
No, and I suppose there's probably a couple of reasons for that. One is, if you're not getting any feedback from viewers because you can't have any physical viewers at the minute, then perhaps why reduce your price? So I suppose from that point of view, the market's in suspended animation. But I think the other point is, when these people came onto the market was particularly buoyant. I mentioned the busy start for 4 years. The number of sales agreed compared to the same period a year ago, up by 11%. So it was a brisk and buoyant market. So it wasn't a market where a large number of price reductions would have been applicable, because properties were selling and selling at or close to the prices that they were marketed at. So it's not an environment as we went into this lockdown where price reductions would have been the norm. And so against that backdrop, we haven't seen many price reductions either.
Okay, another question coming in from several people is it, well, to me, it seems like an obvious question, but you might have more insight on this. Is it taking longer for sales to go through, and by how much?
Obviously, if you're on the market without a buyer, then, as I said, you're in a period where the length of lockdown means it's going to take that much longer before you can start showing viewers and prospective buyers round again. Obviously, there are those people a lot on the poll who were buying and selling, and they may have well agreed a sale. It does take, and it's a very frustrating aspect of the English housing market, the UK, well, English, Scotland's got a different system. But the average length of time once you've got an offer to actually exchange completion and moving in can be 3 or 4 months. So one of the positives, and there's very few really in this terrible COVID situation, health issues to one side, but one of the knock-on effects is that it's enabling conveyancers to progress the legal side of those deals that are in the pipeline, so that when we come out of this, then there might be a lot of deals an awful lot closer to exchange and completion. So one of the benefits of being cooped up in one's existing house is that new home deal that you've got lined up is going to be that much closer once we're let out of lockdown and people are able to move again.
We have a question from, originally it came from Andy, but there are a lot of similar ones. So Andy is saying, my flat is under offer, but do you think prices are going to fall when after lockdown, and is there a risk of the buyer withdrawing their offer? But before you answer this question, this same question seems to be coming from both different angles. There are also questions from buyers who have put in an offer, and they're saying, well, would it be smart of me perhaps to withdraw my offer and put in a lower offer post-lockdown if prices are going to drop? So I guess these two questions are very much linked to the bigger question that almost everyone is asking, is what's going to happen to prices?
Yeah. Obviously, every deal has got a buyer on one side and a seller on the other. Couple of points here. First of all, we have been measuring the number of sales agreed and how many of those have actually fallen through during this lockdown period. And I have to say, again, similar to the amount of property that's remained on the market, the vast majority of deals that were in place as we went into lockdown are still in place. But that doesn't stop people thinking, what's the situation going to be, or what should I do, depending on which side of that buyer or seller fence that you're on. Let's not forget as well that quite a few transactions will have a chain, and so there's lots of buyers further and up and down the chain as well. As a buyer, your circumstances genuinely may have changed, which might mean you can't afford as much as you could before lockdown. So that gives you no option but to make a lower offer. And then it very much depends upon the circumstances of the seller. Can that seller afford to reduce by that much, or does that mess up their ongoing move? And actually, rather than just your own deal falling through, several others do as well. So at the moment, there seems to be a lot of goodwill and momentum, and we're all in this together to try and hold these deals, because if you like the property before lockdown, there's hopefully not a lot to dislike it a few weeks later. But particularly if you're stretched, or we've got a lot of first-time buyers here, they're probably thinking, would my money go further if I hang back and wait? Well, that crystal ball that you talked about earlier, it's really difficult to assess where things are going to be. I talked of pent-up demand earlier, and actually that pent-up demand's got greater, if you like, because a very busy year and a lot of the deals that would have been done over the last few weeks, and indeed a few weeks that we've got left before lockdown as well, that demand hasn't been satisfied. So that's pent up. You've got the Brexit pent up demand as well. So as prices hadn't had a boom runaway time, and I think the things to watch for, because Rightmove does a house price index every month, a little plug for our house price index monthly report, a good way of keeping in touch. But not only our indices, but all the other indices are going to take a few months to get enough data to be able to give buyers and sellers an indication of what direction prices are going in. So I come back to those fundamentals that I talked about earlier. So in the absence of house price indices, I would be looking, are mortgages with low deposits and low interest rates and good long fixed terms, are they readily available? Because if they are readily available, then that's another boost for the market, complete with that pent-up demand that I was talking about earlier. Keep an eye on consumer sentiment, but also that V-shaped forecast. How quickly are we coming up the other side? And indeed, people do need employment to buy houses. So keep an eye on employment levels and recovery in employment too.
So these other factors, Miles, the availability of mortgages and employment is what you're saying, that these are more crucial points to look at than simply the asking price itself.
Indeed, as I say, it'll be some time before we get price indicators. Important to note that local markets do vary as well, so you've got to add that complication in. So Rightmove does regional.
Yeah.
It does a regional split as well as national, but there's some, I think, bigger picture indicators here. As I've said, you can't blame people for wanting to try and get a house a bit cheaper. Obviously, if you haven't exchanged contracts, there's no legal obligation. There is a moral obligation, particularly if there's a lot of people in the chain as well. But people's individual circumstances vary. But if you look at the economist forecast, you look at the momentum that we had going into the year, then at the moment you can't see some indicators similar to previous downturns. This is quite different in a lot of ways. There may be, I think, a slow motion period when we come back because people take time to find their feet. So I don't see an immediate return to the beginning of the year because life has changed, the world has changed, people have changed. So, but I do see that pent-up demand probably having a bit of a double bubble, if you like, with people that maybe are thinking their existing homes don't suit them, or unfortunately some personal circumstances that have changed where people have to move.
Yeah. Miles, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit in a minute and ask for your prediction as to what you think is going to happen to prices, because a lot of questions are coming in from that. But I'm noticing that from the questions that are coming in, they seem to be, they come in from different angles. So from the perspective of first-time buyers, they would very much welcome house prices to fall because it would, that would make it easier for them to get onto the property ladder. From the point of view of owners of homes, then they would rather they didn't fall, right? So of course, if prices increase too fast, they become unaffordable. But if they fall too much and too fast, then that could be a sign of trouble, and banks could hold back on lending. So what is the best situation that both sides can hope for? Is there a sweet spot there somewhere?
I think probably, and it's ironic, isn't it? I said it was the best start to a housing market for 4 years. So I think actually the sweet spot ideal was probably the market we had going into this, where there was relatively gentle house price inflation, but we've had this interruption. So the big question is, will it carry on? But as I say, I think there'll be this slow motion period. We might have demand diminish somewhat because understandably housing isn't at the top of everybody's agenda at the minute. But I think we'll probably have less supply coming onto the market as people are finding their feet and doing their research as to what's available, some waiting to come off furlough. So you might actually have an equilibrium between some slightly reduced demand and slightly reduced supply. And that equilibrium is important because when prices fall, it's often because there's an oversupply of property, particularly sellers that are forced to sell. And again, one other thing to watch for is forced sales. So if lenders are repossessing properties, then in previous downturns, that has driven prices down. But all the signs so far, we've got the mortgage holiday for 3 months. And because interest rates are low, it's a lot easier for lenders not to repossess if people are in arrears because the debt doesn't build up too quickly as well. So that's another positive factor. Just one point on first-time buyers. Obviously, it's a big step to get onto that first rung of the housing ladder. The key thing is saving for a deposit and there being low deposit mortgages available. So really tough to save for a deposit, particularly if you're renting as well. And that's where Bank of Mum and Dad has traditionally come in. But whilst it's a lovely thought to think that house prices might drop dramatically, what has always gone before is a big recession with dramatic house price falls where there's mass unemployment. And so whilst property prices are cheap or cheaper, unfortunately, you've not got a job to be able to get a mortgage, to be able to go and take advantage of them. Yeah. And to a degree, this happened in 2008, where, as I said earlier, 30, 40, 50% deposit had to be put down. Didn't help first-time buyers at all. There were some relative bargains to be had because they couldn't raise that sort of deposit. So in theory, it sounds nice, but actually, there's the misery of negative equity and big misery of unemployment, and you can't take advantage of it. The people, and we'll come on to buy-to-let investors later, but the people that took advantage of it, if you like, in 2008, 9, 10, were the buy-to-let investors, a lot of whom have cash. So the cheaper prices meant that they could come in rather than first-time buyers.
Okay, let's have another very quick poll here. I'm curious to ask the audience another question. So you have a second poll here, which asking you what has happened to your plans. So after lockdown, okay, I'll read out the question. So what impact has the lockdown had on your progress or plans to buy, sell, or rent a home? So are you still going ahead as planned? Have you postponed your plans for now, but plan to go ahead right after lockdown? Or have you just withdrawn from the process altogether for now? So plenty of answers coming in, which is great. Thank you. We have a very good and active audience out there. I love it. So I'll leave it open just for a couple more seconds and then let's have a look at the results. Okay, let's have a look. Okay, so there's still 39% who are still going ahead as planned. 55% have postponed plans and will continue plan to go ahead after lockdown. There's the L missing there, and the only 6% actually have decided to withdraw from the process altogether. So that is that sounds fairly optimistic, doesn't it, Miles?
I think it backs up the momentum that we saw going into lockdown, and indeed some of the busy activity on Rightmove and still inquiries going into estate agents now. But the bigger picture, cheap availability of mortgages, and let's hope not too much unemployment or a quick recovery, and that V-shaped recovery that a lot of economists are predicting.
Okay, so we have passed the half-hour mark, as we suspected we would, and there are still, most everyone's still on the line and questions coming in. So Miles, if it's okay with you, we'll
Let's
just
keep
stay
going.
on for an extra 10 minutes or so. Miles, I'm sorry, but I am getting a lot of pressure from the audience here asking for a prediction as to what is happening with prices. I don't want to be like the journalist who asks for a simple yes or no answer to what is a pretty complex question. But if you had to place a bet on as to whether prices are going to go up or down after lockdown compared to the same period last year, where would you put your money?
I'd actually choose the option that you didn't give me, so I don't know whether that's avoiding it.
Which
But
one is that?
I think we'll have a relatively benign flat period. I can't see the forces that would drive prices down at present. But also, whilst there was upwards pressure earlier in the year, I think we'll have this slow motion people as people find their feet afterwards. Let's not forget, we're in for an elongated social distancing period, so there's lots of things to get used to. Housing might not be the top of everybody's list, but I think it will be quite high on other people's lists, having either through changed circumstances or deciding during lockdown that the house doesn't suit them. So for the immediate period afterwards, for several months, I think, A, we won't have the house price index evidence, but B, my gut feel, crystal ball, is a relatively flat period. But then, judging by that poll and other indicators, maybe a continuation of upwards price pressure once people get used to social distancing and other things. And let's not forget, this is a new type of scenario we're in. So predictions, if you will forgive me, are a little difficult compared to some
Of
more
course,
traditional previous downturns.
of course. Well, if 94% of home movers are still planning to go ahead with their plans, either they are still going on with their plans or they plan to continue right after lockdown, then you can see that it's quite possible that we'd see a spike in activity as soon as the lockdown is well, as soon as those restrictions are lifted. Now let's go to a couple of questions around mortgages. What do you think is going to happen to mortgage rates?
Um, as we went into lockdown, the Bank of England base rate, which is what the mortgage rate is very much linked to, because it's what lenders can sort of obtain wholesale money at and then lend it out to buyers and borrowers. So that was at 0.25%. And actually, because of this unfortunate situation, that's been dropped to 0.1%. The Bank of England base rate has never, in hundreds of years of history, been lower than it is now. So as long as lenders continue lending with low deposits, I'm not saying that mortgage rates are going to get cheaper than they were before lockdown, because they were already very cheap. But with that slight drop in base rates, it's a very positive sign that money is cheap for lenders to borrow, and hopefully be able to keep rates at the competitive levels that they were. And in terms of one's mortgage interest payments compared to one's wages, the other important ratio is from an affordability perspective, that was at record low levels as well. So it all helps to explain the briskness of the market as we went into lockdown.
Okay, we've got a lot of questions also asking what you think is going to help, is going to happen in terms of whether the government is going to put forward some initiatives or some incentives to help people financially. So that could be either by putting for freezing stamp duties, or doing a discount on them, or somehow. What kind of
Yeah,
incentives
yeah.
do you see the government could put forward, if any?
Well, there's a couple of points here. And in terms of an early indicator of activity in the housing market, if the government comes forward with some incentives, then I think that's another positive indicator to boost activity
Okay.
and a potential upturn. I don't have any inside knowledge, but it's fair to say the government has put a lot of money into protecting jobs and industries so far on the basis of trying to be in a good position to have an economic recovery. And therefore, given that track record, one might guesstimate that they will actually look to boost the housing market. I do know that they judge the housing market as very important because of its spin-off benefits to other industries and retailers. So if you're wanting a strong V-shaped economic recovery, then putting money into incentives like stamp duty or help to buy, or making sure that lenders lend at low deposit mortgages at reasonable rates, then they're all good incentives. It's an interesting, not just interesting, financially beneficial point for buyers that have got deals lined up here. So keep a careful eye on this, because obviously if you're relatively close to exchange, then you need to be looking carefully at what the situation is with stamp duty, because there might be some potential savings there for you. So keep an eye on government announcements. Hopefully there'll be warning so that one can plan one's move, go ahead with it, and benefit from any stamp duty benefits or incentives that they are. Important to note, most first-time buyers and quite a few price brackets are out of the stamp duty payment system anyway, so a relaxation wouldn't help quite a lot of people, and for most first-time buyers, fortunately, are not paying stamp duty anyway.
Yes. Several questions from buy-to-let investors asking whether you would recommend buy-to-let as an investment at the moment. I guess I can make this a twofold questions, because there are also questions related to rent prices and what do you think is going to happen to rentals. So that does have an influence on yields, which of course buy-to-let investors will be keen to know about.
And this is also important for first-time buyers because they're often competing against buy-to-let investors for the same type of property. So buy-to-let investors paying extra taxes on stamp duty on purchase, another 3%, additional taxes in terms of less relief on mortgage interest payments and other taxes as well. So there's been some buy-to-let investors exiting the sector. It's not been as attractive. Great news for first-time buyers. But in this scenario, there might well be more demand for rented. It's a very quick and easy way if you've got a job move, and obviously there's going to be a fair amount of disruption perhaps as a result of the scenario that we're in, where people need relatively quick rented accommodation. That could increase demand for rented accommodation, more demand with less supply from landlords because of the historical recent taxing. Means that could mean upwards pressure on rents. That would mean it more attractive for buy-to-let investors to come back in, but obviously bad news for tenants, a lot of whom might be hard pressed. So you can't, as a landlord, expect to push rents up if tenants are in a difficult financial situation. So that's another wait and see one, but I do think, and certainly the Rightmove statistics show in terms of rental searches, and indeed agents saying that through video viewings, people are taking rented property, and there seems to be good demand there, which could give some upwards price pressure on rents, which may help buy-to-let investors. Not good for tenants.
Okay, so we are slowly coming to the end of this, so I'll fire a couple of other questions, but before I do, I think it's worth reminding everyone that we are going to be running a couple of other live broadcasts like this one. So if you're selling your home soon, if you're planning on selling, or if you're already on the market, on the 12th of May, we have a broadcast which you can sign up, which is all about advice for that. And if you're buying, if you're a first-time buyer, there's another one on the 19th of May with advice for you. We'll send you links following up this broadcast if you've signed up to so that you can sign up to those. We'll also include a link to the house price index, which Miles has referenced earlier on at Rightmove. But let's get a couple of last questions in. This one has to do with supply. So, and with new home builders, developers, has how has that industry been impacted by everything? Have they stopped developing altogether? And has that had an impact on supply, you think?
Yeah, the vast majority have been affected by the same restrictions. There has been some essential building work, and because the activity is outdoor, some developers or builders have interpreted it being okay to carry on, but with appropriate social distancing. The vast majority suspended operations, but have now started to go back to work with appropriate safety. That does mean that appropriate safety means that one's ability to build property is less quick because it takes longer, but also they have been interrupted for several weeks as well. So the estimates are around about a 35% shortfall in this year's new build projection target because of this disruption. Therefore, in terms of lack of supply, that is a real factor, and developers say that they've been actually relatively brisk over lockdown. A lot of people buy off plan, and therefore they're used to buying just on a video or virtual tour of what the property is going to look like, and a lot of reserved properties on that basis. So similar with the poll that we've had of people on this webinar, there seems to be good activity and demand, and that lack of supply again could underpin prices and maybe help prices ease up a bit, actually.
So here's a last and a big question, Miles. When do you think things will begin to feel normal again? And house viewings and valuations, and how long do you think it'll take before we feel like we're back to we have a sense of normality again?
Yeah. So I think normal as we knew it, from lots of aspects, we might never see that again. So if we talk probably about the new normal, people have got a lot happier with Zoom and video. So in terms of physical viewings, I think more people, partly because of the safety aspect and social distancing, might do a lot of initial viewings of property, far more online and using video. So there might be fewer physical viewings, but that might well save people's time, and people might self-qualify because they'll look at more properties online and say, that one suits me, but you know what, those two or three don't. Volume-wise, transaction levels are obviously going to be substantially down this year, but that pent-up demand, I think, will come back into the market. It may not be totally this year, but I think next year and the year beyond, we'll see us back to the normal levels of volumes on an annual basis. But as I've said earlier, take time for the market to find its feet after this major shock and difference to our normal lives. In terms of when is it going to get better, I think we need to do more of these webinars, Dan, and keep people up to date. We've got lots of statistics. So as you said earlier, a release of some pent-up demand when lockdown finishes, but we're going to have this elongated social distancing period where I think we'll have a gentler recovery than what we've been used to at the beginning of the year. But it does seem to be that there's a lot of factors in favour of a decent and active housing market going forward.
Okay, well, Miles, thank you very, very much for joining and for taking all of these questions. Thank you also to all of you out there. Just a couple of last things. So we've got an email prepared to send to you after this session, so you will be receiving a recording of this. So if you've missed any of it, you'll be able to watch back. That email, we will include links to the next few broadcasts, which you can sign up to and register if you are interested in. And do make sure as well to go onto rightmove.co.uk, as right there on the home page, you'll be able to see a banner which links to our coronavirus advice page. So loads of other articles, Q&As, and all kinds of information which you will most definitely find helpful. So for now, from all of us here at Rightmove, Miles, thank you, and thank you very much to all of you who have tuned in. We hope to hear from you again soon, and stay safe, and thank you very much.
Thank you.